At the dawn of one of the most notorious executions in history, the events on Golgotha Hill would provoke a profound transformation in all those present. The Roman centurion Marcus, accustomed to the brutality of war and the indifference of executions, would find his faith and beliefs challenged. At the epicenter of the agony, questions about justice, strength, and power would emerge, leading to a journey of introspection, spiritual transformation, and courage. The Roman centurion Marcus, a man hardened by war and countless executions, reflected the coldness and impassiveness of someone used to following strict orders. Jerusalem was bustling with the imminence of Passover and the crucifixion of Jesus. That morning, Marcus, with a heavy mind, donned his armor, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility on his shoulders. As he walked through the narrow streets, Marcus observed the fervor and agitation of the crowds. The smell of sweat, dust, and blood permeated the air, mixing with the shouts and murmurs of the curious and the followers of Jesus. For him, it was just another day at work, a routine he knew all too well. But something about this specific execution felt different, though he couldn't yet understand what. Upon arriving at the crucifixion site, Marcus gave firm orders, observing everything attentively. However, when he met Jesus' eyes, a serenity and compassion disarmed Marcus for a brief moment, initiating a deep internal conflict, the struggle between following orders and listening to the silent voice of his own conscience. As the crucifixion progressed, a restlessness grew within Marcus. The sound of nails piercing flesh, the cries of pain, and the reaction of the surrounding crowd, all of this was familiar. But there was something in Jesus' dignity, even amid suffering, that began to erode the centurion's usual coldness. The sky, previously clear and sunny, began to fill with dark clouds. A sudden eclipse plunged the city into a frightening darkness. Marcus, who always prided himself on his rationality and control, felt a chill run down his spine. He looked up, seeking some explanation, but found only an unfathomable void. As Jesus hung on the cross, his words echoed across the hill, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Marcus, accustomed to violence and revenge, was deeply touched by that plea for forgiveness. How could someone in the midst of such intense agony offer mercy? This question rooted itself in his mind, challenging everything he believed about strength and power. Jesus' followers wept and despaired at the foot of the cross. Mary, Jesus' mother, particularly captivated the centurion with her silent and dignified pain. Marcus watched, feeling a guilt he couldn't explain. Each tear shed seemed to weigh on him, intensifying the internal conflict that had already begun. Then the ground began to tremble. An earthquake shook the earth, causing many to fall to their knees in terror. Marcus held onto a nearby rock, his heart pounding uncontrollably. The screams of the crowd mixed with his own silent panic. He had never experienced anything like this, and the sense of helplessness was overwhelming. Marcus couldn't take his eyes off the figure of Jesus on the cross. There was something deeply disturbing and at the same time, inspiring in the way Jesus faced death. Even when the nails penetrated his flesh, he did not scream in despair like other prisoners. Instead, a look of acceptance and serenity rested on his face as if he were at peace with his fate. Jesus, covered in blood and dust, exuded a dignity that starkly contrasted with the brutality of the situation. He did not beg for mercy, did not curse his tormentors. Every word that came from his mouth carried an impressive calm, disarming the violence around him with a silent strength. When he looked at the soldiers who had tortured him, including Marcus, there was something more than pain in his eyes. There was compassion. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." These words echoed in Marcus's mind repeatedly. He remembered every moment when he had given orders to whip, ridicule, and finally crucify Jesus. In his military career, Marcus had witnessed countless executions, each more brutal than the last, but he had never encountered anyone who faced death with such serenity. This serenity began to plant a seed of doubt and curiosity in his hardened heart. He observed Jesus' interactions with the other crucified and with the people around. Jesus comforted one of the criminals beside him, promising him they would be together in paradise. There was an invisible force in that promise, a force that transcended physical pain and public humiliation. Marcus felt a wave of conflicting emotions, admiration, confusion, and growing discomfort with his role in the execution. The centurion noticed the crowd's reaction as well. Many wept and lamented, but there was an aura of hope among Jesus' followers. It was as if, even in the midst of death, they glimpsed something greater, something Marcus couldn't fully understand. Jesus' dignity under torture was slowly transforming the atmosphere around, challenging the brutality Marcus knew so well. Every groan of pain, every word uttered, every look of compassion penetrated Marcus's emotional armor. He felt his facade of indifference disintegrating. The contrast between Jesus' serenity and the violence he was accustomed to was overwhelming. Marcus began to question the justice of his actions, the legitimacy of the orders he blindly followed, and the true meaning of strength and power. As Jesus suffered on the cross, the atmosphere around became increasingly chaotic and charged with emotion. Marcus, with his keen eye, observed the crowd gathered at the foot of Golgotha. Men, women, and children pressed against each other, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity, deep sadness, and incited hatred. The religious leaders were at the forefront, fanning the flames of popular fervor. Their shouts echoed through the valley, inflaming the crowd with words of condemnation. Blasphemer! False prophet, King of the Jews, save yourself. The intensity of the hatred directed at Jesus was unusual, even for Marcus, who had seen many prisoners despised and mistreated. Observing the scene, Marcus couldn't help but feel a growing discomfort. The verbal violence of the crowd, the way people let themselves be carried away by the fervor of the religious leaders. All this began to alter his perception of the justice of the execution. He saw children repeating their parents' words of hatred, their eyes shining with a fervor they didn't fully understand. Amid the tumult, there were faces that stood out for their silent pain. Jesus' followers, unable to do anything but witness their master's suffering, looked at him with tear-filled eyes and wounded hope. Mary, his mother, was among them, the pain on her face a reflection of all mothers who lose their children. Marcus felt a tightness in his heart, seeing her anguish. The image of that woman, destroyed by suffering, but still standing, became a symbol of a greater injustice than he could comprehend. The religious leaders, on the other hand, seemed to revel in every scream of Jesus' agony. They exchanged looks of satisfaction, their mouths twisted into cruel smiles. For Marcus, the manipulation of the crowd by the religious leaders was a disturbing revelation. He began to question the extent to which people could be influenced and led to actions that, in other contexts, would be unthinkable. He remembered Jesus' words on the cross, words of forgiveness and compassion, and contrasted them with the blind hatred of the crowd. How could a man who preached love and forgiveness be the target of such cruelty? The question hammered in his mind, instigating a critical reflection on human nature and the power of influence. Marcus began to see the crucifixion not just as an act of Roman justice, but as an event charged with manipulation and injustice. He realized that blind obedience to orders and acceptance of the loudest voices could lead to profound tragedies. The crowd, driven by instigated fear and hatred, had become an instrument in the hands of religious leaders, forgetting their own humanity. The behavior of the masses, the way they allowed themselves to be manipulated without questioning, was a disturbing mirror for Marcus. He wondered if he himself had not been, until that moment, a puppet of the system, following orders without ever questioning the morality of his actions. The darkness that fell over Jerusalem at noon was like a shroud of fear that extended over the hearts of all present. The sun, which shone brightly minutes before, was swallowed by dense shadows, leaving the city submerged in a twilight that seemed to anticipate something terrible. Marcus, looking at the darkened sky, felt a chill rise up his spine. He knew this was not a simple eclipse. There was something supernatural and deeply disturbing happening. The crowd, which had previously vociferated with fervor, now fell into a murmur of fear and uncertainty. People hugged each other, looked at the sky with wide eyes, and prayed in despair. The religious leaders, who had previously incited the crowd, were now visibly shaken, their faces a mask of perplexity and fear. Marcus noticed their hands trembling as they tried to maintain composure. The tremor that followed was even more terrifying. The ground seemed to pulse, shaking under everyone's feet. Buildings swayed, stones rolled down the streets, and the deep sound of the earthquake echoed like the roar of an angry god. Marcus, struggling to maintain balance, held onto a nearby rock, his heart pounding uncontrollably. He saw the temple in the distance tremble, its walls shaking violently. As the ground still trembled, screams of fear and panic spread through the crowd. Marcus looked at Jesus on the cross and saw something he would never forget. Even amid the chaos, Jesus' expression remained serene, as if he were at peace with the turmoil around him. The calm on his face, in contrast to the crowd's terror, reinforced in Marcus the conviction that he was witnessing something far beyond his understanding. These supernatural phenomena were not mere natural accidents. They carried a profound spiritual significance. Marcus felt this in every fiber of his being. The darkening of the sky and the earthquake seemed to be nature's response to the injustice being committed. It was as if the universe itself was crying out, denouncing the cruelty and proclaiming the uniqueness of Jesus. The reaction of the people around also reinforced this idea. Some fell to their knees, crying out for mercy. Others, like Jesus' followers, looked at him with a mixture of pain and renewed hope. They knew his death was not the end, but the beginning of something greater, something that transcended human understanding. For Marcus, these extraordinary events were a turning point. He, a soldier trained for rationality and control, now faced mysteries that defied his logic. He felt an increasing openness to mystery, a desire to seek a deeper understanding of reality. What once seemed clear and defined was now shrouded in shadows and questions. The conviction that Jesus was special, someone more than just a man, began to take root deeply in his heart. Marcus felt an inexplicable connection with him, a bond that transcended his role as executioner. He began to realize that his own spiritual journey was just beginning, and that he needed to understand what the events he had witnessed truly meant. As the darkness began to dissipate and the tremor ceased, Marcus looked one last time at Jesus, now still on the cross. He knew that moment would forever change the way he saw the world and his place in it. As the darkness dissipated and the tremor ceased, the soft but powerful sound of Jesus' voice echoed across the hill. He, hanging on the cross with his body exhausted and covered in wounds, found the strength to utter words that defied all logic and expectation. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Marcus, already shaken by the supernatural events, felt these words like a direct blow to the heart. He stopped, incredulous, trying to process what he had just heard. Jesus, even in the midst of indescribable agony, was asking for forgiveness for those who had tortured and condemned him to death. Those words of mercy and love transcended human understanding and starkly contrasted with the brutality of the execution Marcus was overseeing. For Marcus, that prayer for forgiveness was something incomprehensible. He, a soldier hardened by war, accustomed to revenge and hatred, was facing a demonstration of compassion so pure that it completely disarmed him. In his years of service to the empire, he had never witnessed such a profound act of mercy. That prayer was a reflection of an inner strength Marcus had never imagined possible. He looked around, seeking in the faces of the crowd a similar understanding. Some were on their knees, others wept silently, and many, like Marcus, seemed to be struggling to grasp the depth of those words. The religious leaders, once full of hatred and condemnation, now seemed disturbed, unable to ignore the impact of Jesus' words. Jesus' prayer for forgiveness reverberated in Marcus's mind. He wondered how someone could forgive their executioners with such sincerity. This demonstration of unconditional love and compassion touched a part of him that he had forgotten existed. The brutality of the execution he was overseeing now seemed even more grotesque in contrast to Jesus' goodness. Marcus began to reflect on the power of forgiveness and compassion. He realized that these acts were not signs of weakness but of extraordinary strength and courage. Jesus' forgiveness had the power to transform lives, heal deep wounds, and promote real and lasting change. Jesus' prayer for forgiveness not only challenged Marcus's beliefs, but also began to heal the invisible wounds he carried in his soul. He felt a new understanding forming within him, a perception that love and mercy were the true forces that moved the world. The brutality he had known throughout his military life now seemed small and insignificant compared to the immensity of Jesus' forgiveness. At that moment, Marcus made a silent decision. He knew he couldn't continue living the same way. Jesus' prayer had planted in his heart a desire to seek something greater, something that transcended violence and hatred. He wanted to understand more about the man on the cross, about the force that moved him, and the peace he emanated. In the days following the crucifixion, Marcus withdrew to an isolated place in the hills around Jerusalem. He needed time to process everything he had witnessed and to understand the changes occurring within himself. As he contemplated the vast horizon, Marcus felt a whirlwind of emotions. Jesus' serenity and dignity, the supernatural phenomena, and above all, the prayer for forgiveness had shaken the foundations of his beliefs. He, a soldier dedicated to the empire and accustomed to the brutality of war, now questioned everything he knew about strength and power. Each night, under the starry sky, Marcus reflected on the events of that fateful day. He remembered Jesus' gaze, which seemed to see beyond the flesh, straight into his soul. A gaze that did not judge but understood and forgave. He felt torn between the man he had always been and the man beginning to emerge within him. The growing conviction that he had witnessed something divine drove him to seek answers. He began to look for Jesus' followers, those who knew his message and could help him better understand the man who had changed his life. These encounters brought him a new perspective. Hearing the stories of Jesus' healing, love, and forgiveness reinforced the transformation he felt. Each account was a piece of the spiritual puzzle he was trying to assemble. Marcus found John, one of the apostles, who told him about Jesus' teachings, about loving one's neighbor and forgiving 70 times 7. John spoke with a conviction and serenity that deeply touched Marcus. Jesus' words, passed through John, echoed in his heart, resonating with a truth he could not ignore. The nights of reflection and days of spiritual search began to shape a new awareness within Marcus. He understood that his journey would not be easy. The past was full of shadows and violence, but the possibility of redemption and spiritual growth was a light that guided him. Each step he took toward self-knowledge was a step toward healing. He began to see his past actions with different eyes, not with shame, but with an understanding of their impact. This led him to a determination to change, to use his strength to protect and help rather than destroy. Marcus's transformation was a painful but also liberating process. He allowed himself to feel the pain of others, the compassion, and this began to heal his own internal wounds. Marcus's transformation was a powerful message. No matter how deeply someone is plunged into darkness, the light of compassion and forgiveness can bring about true change. He became a living example that everyone is capable of redemption and spiritual growth. His journey, which began with doubt and pain, now moved with purpose and hope. Each encounter, each reflection, each step taken toward love and forgiveness reinforced his new conviction. Marcus was no longer just a soldier of the empire, he was becoming a soldier of peace, someone who saw true strength not in control but in the ability to love and forgive. Thus, Marcus, the centurion hardened by war, was transforming into a man guided by faith and compassion. His heart, once shielded by indifference, now beat with a new purpose. And he knew, with unwavering certainty, that his life would never be the same. His journey was just beginning, and he embraced it with a renewed spirit and a soul that longed for more light and truth. As Marcus delved into his journey of transformation, he was not the only one affected by the events he had witnessed. Returning to his post and observing the other soldiers and spectators, he realized that Jesus' crucifixion had left deep marks on many hearts. Some of the soldiers, still trying to maintain a facade of indifference, mocked Jesus' followers and ridiculed their beliefs. For them, it was an attempt to reaffirm their strength and deny the discomfort they felt. One of the soldiers, Cassius, laughed loudly, but Marcus noticed the lack of conviction in his eyes. It was a nervous laugh, a desperate attempt to stifle the doubts arising within him. Other soldiers, however, showed signs of unease. Titus, a young recruit, was found in a corner, lost in thought. Marcus approached him, and in a rare moment of vulnerability, Titus confessed that Jesus' words and the supernatural events had shaken his beliefs. He admitted that he had never witnessed something so powerful, and that it made him question everything he knew about justice and duty. Among the spectators, the reaction was also diverse. Many quickly walked away, wanting to forget what they had seen, but some remained, discussing in hushed tones. A woman with tears in her eyes murmured to herself that Jesus was truly the Son of God. Her eyes were filled with a new kind of hope, a faith that had sprouted amid the tragedy. Marcus found John again, surrounded by some of Jesus' followers. They shared their experiences, trying to find meaning in their master's suffering and death. John's presence and the unwavering faith of the disciples served as comfort and inspiration for many. Their words touched hearts, awakening new understanding and renewed hope. But it wasn't just the believers who felt touched. A Pharisee, who had initially participated in the accusations against Jesus, now seemed deeply disturbed. He couldn't get Jesus' words of forgiveness out of his head. The internal conflict was evident on his face, as he struggled to reconcile his actions with the guilt now consuming him. Marcus observed all this with a more compassionate and understanding eye. He saw in others the reflection of his own transformation, realizing that the extraordinary events of that crucifixion had the power to touch everyone, regardless of their beliefs or positions. Each person reacted differently, but all were affected in some way. These divided reactions showed the complexity of human nature. Mockery and scorn were often a shield to hide fear and doubt. Emerging faith was a response to the search for meaning amid chaos. Marcus began to understand that everyone faced transformation in their own way, and all reactions were valid and deserved empathy. Understanding this diversity of reactions helped Marcus strengthen his own conviction. He saw that Jesus' behavior, his dignity, and compassion had planted seeds of change in many hearts. Transformation was possible for all, as long as they allowed themselves to feel and reflect on what they had witnessed. While discussions continued and people processed their emotions, Marcus felt more determined than ever to follow his new path. He knew his journey was intertwined with others, that together they could seek deeper understanding and find healing and redemption. With a heart full of emotions, Marcus committed to being a source of support and inspiration to those around him. He wanted to help others find the same peace and understanding that was beginning to sprout in his own heart. And so, even amid uncertainty and conflict, hope and faith began to bloom, guiding each one in their respective journeys of transformation and discovery. Marcus's transformation culminated in a moment he knew was inevitable. Amid his reflections and the fervent discussions around, he felt the need to proclaim his faith, not just to himself, but before everyone. The sun was setting, painting the sky red and gold, creating a solemn and meaningful atmosphere. The hill where Jesus had been crucified was still imbued with an energy Marcus felt pulsing in his heart. Surrounded by soldiers and spectators, Marcus stepped forward to an elevated place where everyone could see him. He knew this act could have severe repercussions. He was, after all, a Roman soldier, a centurion of the empire. However, the courage now burning in his chest outweighed any fear of punishment or ostracism. The courage now burning in my chest outweighs any fear of punishment or ostracism. Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the murmurs of conversations. All eyes turned to him, some curious, others perplexed. He felt the weight of his fellow soldiers' gaze, but the determination in his heart drove him on. Today, we witnessed something that defies human understanding. We saw the dignity of a man in the midst of the greatest agony, his compassion even while being tortured, and the signs from the heavens that proclaimed his innocence. He paused, taking a deep breath, gathering strength. The silence around him was absolute, every person hanging on his words. I, Marcus, Centurion of the Roman Empire, stood at the foot of this cross and saw the truth. Truly, this man was the Son of God. The soldiers around him reacted in various ways. Cassius, who had previously mocked, now looked at Marcus with a mix of respect and envy for his courage. Titus, the young recruit, seemed inspired, his eyes shining with new hope. Even some of the religious leaders who remained there fixed him with looks of disbelief, unable to ignore the strength of his conviction. Jesus' followers, including John, approached, their faces full of gratitude and acceptance. John placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and friendship. Thank you. Your faith gives us strength. The next day, Mary Magdalene and other women went to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body, only to find that the stone had been removed and the tomb was empty. The astonishment and confusion quickly turned to joy when an angel announced to us that Jesus had risen. My heart overflowing with emotion, I ran to tell the disciples. I became one of the first to witness the resurrection, and my fervent faith inspired many to follow Jesus' path. For Marcus, Jesus' resurrection was the final confirmation of everything he had felt. I saw faith renewed in Titus's eyes and curiosity grow in Cassius. Among Jesus' followers, there was a sense of purpose and mission, a calling to spread the good news that death was not the end, but a new beginning. Inspired by the resurrection, I decided my life would serve this cause, protecting and supporting those who shared my new faith. The effects of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection echoed through the years. The disciples, full of courage and guided by the Holy Spirit, traveled to distant lands, spreading the message of love, forgiveness, and redemption. Peter, John, James, and the others faced persecutions and challenges, but the flame of faith kindled that day never went out. The nascent church began to grow, transforming hearts and minds everywhere.
Marcus, now a devout follower of Jesus, traveled through cities and villages sharing his testimony. He told his story not as a Roman soldier, but as a man transformed by grace and love. His journey inspired many to reflect on their own lives and consider the legacy they wanted to leave. He taught that, regardless of the past, everyone could find redemption and purpose.
Thus, the story of Jesus, seen through the eyes of a Roman centurion, revealed the depth of the impact of his acts of love and sacrifice. Marcus and all those touched by Jesus became living witnesses of the transformative power of faith. They learned that although life is full of challenges and adversities, love and forgiveness have the power to change the world. Let's pray. Almighty God, as we reflect on the journey of Marcus, the Roman centurion who witnessed the extraordinary events of Jesus' crucifixion, we ask that you open our hearts and minds to the spiritual transformation we too can experience. Help us to understand the depth of your love and forgiveness, just as Marcus came to comprehend the true strength found in compassion and mercy. May we see beyond appearances and embrace the serenity and dignity that Jesus demonstrated in his final moments. Lord, guide us on our own journey of faith. May the light of your love shine in our hearts, dispelling all darkness and doubt. Give us the courage to proclaim our faith as Marcus did, even in the face of adversity and worldly pressures. Help us to be instruments of your peace, to love and forgive one another, following the example of Jesus. May we seek true strength in the ability to love and forgive, promoting transformation and healing in our lives and the lives of those around us. Lord, may this story inspire all of us to reflect on our own legacy. May we make a difference in the world through acts of love and compassion, bringing light and hope amid darkness. We ask this in the name of your beloved Son, Jesus Christ, who showed us the path to true life and redemption. Amen.